Chaim. So, on January 31st, 2009, 6:30 a.m. Pacific time, millions of people open up their computers, they opened the web browser, and they searched for some of their favorite sites that they want, whatever they were looking for. And a big list of search results popped up on Google, and they clicked on they looked through the results, and they found one that they liked. 2009, and they clicked on the result that they wanted, but instead of being taken to the page, they suddenly got this scary warning message that said, "This site may harm your computer." Okay, I'm not going to mess with that site. They went back, they tried to search again, they clicked a different search result, and again they got the same scary message. "This site may harm your computer. It's a dangerous site." And this was pretty much every search result that they try to click on. And this went on for the next 40 minutes. Finally, after 40 minutes, everything went back to normal. People were able to browse normally. What was the problem? So the next day, Google came out with a statement. They said it was a result of human error. You see, Google has a list of dangerous sites that they warn people against visiting. And one of their engineers was adding some sites to the list, and accidentally, instead of typing in a full name of a website, they typed in a /, and they hit enter. And it turns out that every website has a / in it, so every website was now considered a dangerous website. So, we always talk about how important every single word that we say is. And every single letter has importance, but even a / could take down the whole internet for 40 minutes. So, in this week's Parsha, Hashem says to Moshe that this was after Miriam passed away, and the water stopped flowing, and the Jewish people were thirsty. So Hashem told Moshe to take the Jewish people out to the rock, and to speak to the rock, and it will give water. And in the end, Moshe didn't speak to the rock. He hit the rock, and that was considered a big mistake on Moshe's part. So the obvious question, which you asked in the past, and there are many, many answers given, is why was it so important that Moshe speak to the rock, right? Earlier, Hashem told Moshe to hit the rock 40 years earlier, and in general, whenever Moshe did miracles, he used his stick. Pretty much everything that he did, he used a stick. But a test has to have a message behind it, something important behind it, a reason behind it. And why is this considered such an important and serious thing? So, a Bacher, I don't know what his name was, we'll call him Chaim for the story. He learned in the Shabiner Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, and he got engaged. Now, of course, it's a very joyous event. And he had an engagement party in the city of Tzvas. And the custom was that whenever a bacher in the yeshiva got engaged, the yeshiva would send one of the members of the faculty to the engagement party to represent the yeshiva. Now, this was a bit of a long trip from Yerushalayim to Tzvas. It was a 4-hour trip. It would be 4 hours there, 4 hours back. But, it's, one of the Bachrim gets engaged, it's important to have someone from the yeshiva present to represent them. So the mashgiach of the yeshiva, Rabbi Binyamin Rimmer, he got on the bus and he sat for a long 4-hour trip to Tzvas. He comes there, and he doesn't really know anybody there. It's a bit of a loud party. He doesn't really feel, he looks around, he can't really find anyone to talk to. But he goes up to the front to meet the bacher, to wish him mazel tov, to wish his father mazel tov, his father-in-law, his future father-in-law. And the father-in-law says, "Oh, you're here, you're mashgiach of the yeshiva, where my son-in-law is learning, so maybe you could say a few words." Okay, he gets up, he wants to talk, and everyone's busy talking, no one's interested in listening to a word he has to say. But he talks for 5 minutes, he says, what a special bacher this is, he's been learning in the yeshiva for a few years, and no one really even heard him speak. He felt like it was a bit of a waste of time. He spoke for 5 minutes, he stayed there for another 10 minutes, after 50 minutes he got back on the bus, and he took another 4 hours back to Yerushalayim. And he kind of felt that he wasted a day. Right? Anyways, a year goes by, and he meets this Bakr, he meets Chaim in the street. The Mashgiach meets Chaim in the street, and Chaim is carrying a Gemara with him, and he's dressed like a rabbi, and the Mashgiach is a little surprised, because in yeshiva he wasn't from the most serious Bakr, he wasn't someone who was very into learning, and he figured after he gets married, he's going to, get a job, he's going to go to work, he's not going to be involved in learning. So he asked him, what are you doing? Well, what do you work in? And he says, I'm a Maggid Shir, I give classes in a yeshiva. And he says, a little surprised, how did you end up as a Maggid Shir? And walking around with the Gemara, you didn't seem like the type of guy who would be interested. So he says, well, it's all to your credit. My credit? What did I do? So he says, you remember you traveled all the way to Tzfas for my engagement party, and you spoke. Now, you probably thought that nobody was listening to you, and there weren't really a lot of people listening to you, but my father-in-law was listening to every word you said. And my father-in-law is a very simple person, and he's a little naive, and he took everything you said very seriously. And he was very impressed. A rabbi, a mashgiach at a yeshiva, traveled 4 hours for my son-in-law's engagement, and he said such nice things about him. And he came home and he told his wife and his daughter, you know what a special son-in-law we have? You know what a special husband we have? It's amazing. He's one of the top bachrim in the yeshiva. The mashgiach traveled all the way here, traveled 8 hours for this. And then, the next month went by and we're planning the wedding, and of course, when we're planning for what's going to happen after the wedding, my father-in-law says, of course, right after the wedding, you'll go to Kollel to continue your studies. And I was like, I'm not really sure. And he's like, what do you mean? They're the top Bachram in the yeshiva. The Mashgiach traveled all the way and he said such nice things about you. And I couldn't say no, right? If that's what my wife and my in-laws all expected from me. So, okay, I agreed. And I couldn't let them down. And I got very involved in the learning. And now, as you see, I'm walking around with the Gemara all day. And I'm a Maggid Shir. And he realized that those 5 minutes that he spoke when he thought no one was really listening, he realized what an impact and how powerful that can be. When we read in Pirkei Avos, in the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, it says that Hashem, when He created the world through 10 utterances, through 10 phrases, 10 words. And we have a pasuk that says, that these words of Hashem that He used to create the world are eternal, and they're constantly giving life and energy to everything in the world. And we don't really appreciate the power of words, but we have to realize that our whole world was created with words. And a few nice words that we could say to somebody, we don't necessarily realize the power and the impact that it can have. So in an old age home, Shoymrei Achoymes, an old age home in Yerushalayim, there's a young rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Deitch, was going to visit the old people in the home, and it was the beginning of the month of Elul, and he went to visit an old man by the name of Rabbi Yosef Shmuel Fogel. And he comes into his room, and usually the elderly people, especially those who are older, didn't really have a lot of family, were very excited to have visitors. But Rabbi Yosef Shmuel, when he comes into the room, he's saying Tehillim, and he doesn't even look up. He continues reading. And he goes and he's reading, and he's reading, and he's reading until he finished whatever he was doing, his whole thing. And then he looked up and he smiled. Yes, welcome. He's so happy to have a guest. And he said, and he excused himself. He apologized that he wasn't able to answer right away, but he says it's now during the month of Elul now, and I try to spend as much time as possible reading Tehillim. And learning and davening and reading Tehillim. And so Deitch asked him, why, where did you get this custom from? And he says, I'll tell you. Many years ago when I was much younger, when I was still a teenager, so I was learning in the yeshiva in Vizhnitz, in Romania. I think now it's part of Ukraine. At that time it was part of Romania. the Rebbe Eliezer Hager, the author of Sefer Damasek Eliezer, was in charge of the yeshiva. And one day I was a yeshiva bacher, and yeshiva bacherim are, at least in those days, yeshiva bacherim were usually hungry. They didn't get enough food to eat. The food that they had was usually some dry bread. And I was walking in the street, and it was also during the month of Elul, and I was a little hungry, and I noticed, thanks, Chaim. And I noticed a wagon riding by, loaded with apples. And I hadn't eaten an apple in months. It looked so delicious. And I turned to Hashem and I said, Hashem, these apples look so delicious. Please, can you get me one of these apples? And at that moment, the wagon hit a bump in the road and an apple flew off the wagon and landed on the floor. Okay, listen. The wagon driver didn't notice. He continued going. He turned the corner. He was gone. So I walked over. I picked up the apple. I was so excited that I couldn't control myself. I couldn't even wait till I got back to the yeshiva. I decided to make a bracha and take a bite right then and there. Now today, eating an apple in the street is a normal thing. But 80 years ago, it was considered a very rude thing to eat in the street. At least in that area. But he couldn't control himself, and he took the apple, he made a bracha, and he started eating. And as he's taking a bite of the apple, guess who turns the corner? The Rebbe. The Vizhnitzer Rebbe turns the corner. His face turns red, he's all embarrassed, right? And the Rebbe walks over to him, wishes him a good day, a big smile. And he says, wow, such a Hasidish bacher. He's a little confused. He was expecting the Rebbe to be a little upset at him. And the Rebbe says, I see you really internalized the message we were teaching in the yeshiva. What message? Well, we teach all the bacher how important it is during the month of Elul to use out every minute. And he was taught in the yeshiva that a person's lips should never rest during the month of Elul. You should always be davening, learning, saying Tehillim. And he says, I see that you're walking in the street and you're probably learned so much and davened so much, and you didn't want your lips to rest at all, so you took an apple and you started chewing the apple. Right? You wanted to internalize the message. And he says he had a big smile on his face, he got a compliment from the Rebbe, and he obviously realized that the Rebbe was trying to give him, working very hard to come up with a compliment to give him. And he said, I went back to the yeshiva and I said, listen, if the Rebbe says that I internalized this message, I got to really internalize the message. And I spent the rest of the month, every free moment, davening, learning, reading Tehillim, and since then, every Elul, I make sure to not let my lips rest during the entire month of Elul. So again, we see, obviously, the Rebbe had a choice. He could have rebuked him. Who knows what that would have done? He could have just kept quiet, or he could look for something positive to say. And the few positive words that the Rebbe said, maybe even as a joke, was, we see 70, 80 years later, the impact that they had. The impact of a nice word you say about somebody, right? So we're taught that Hashem created man in His image, B'Tselem Elokim, and He created him as a nefesh. He added a living soul to him. And Onkelos explains what does it mean, a living soul, a speaking soul, a ruach l'mal, a speaking spirit, which is what makes a person unique, what makes a person special, and what makes us similar to Hashem. Just like Hashem was able to say a few words, 10 phrases, and create an entire world, each and every one of us has the power, with a nice word that we say to somebody, to create, to build the person up, and to accomplish so much. We don't recognize the power of one word that we say to somebody. There was in the time of the Chafetz Chaim, there was a Jewish pharmacist who kept his store open on Shabbos. And some of the rabbis in the city, were not very happy, and they try to yell at him. But they first try to speak to them, they try to yell at him, but nothing really worked. So the Chafetz Chaim, when he heard about it, he went to visit this pharmacist, and the pharmacist was expecting the Chafetz Chaim to yell at him. But the Chavetz Chaim didn't. The Chavetz Chaim walked into the store, and he said, you're so lucky. You have such a schus. You have such a great merit. And he says, what's the great merit that I have? He says, such a special mitzvah you have. What's the mitzvah? He says, you work in the pharmacy all day. You give medicine to sick people. Do you know how many lives you save every day? You know how many mitzvahs you accomplish every day? You're so lucky, he said. If I was in your position, he says, every time I would mix a medicine, I would say, thank you, Hashem, for giving me this chus to save someone's life. Now, the pharmacist wasn't very excited about this. He wasn't religious. He didn't believe in any of it. But, this is what the Chavetz Chaim is asking him. He thought the Chavetz Chaim was going to ask him to close his store on Shabbos. But this is a lot easier. Whenever you mix medicine, say thank you, Hashem, for the big mitzvah. So he started doing it. And guess what? That Shabbos, he started preparing a medicine, and he said, thank you, Hashem, for giving me the big mitzvah. And then he's like, should I really be doing it now? I don't know. Maybe if somebody's life's in danger, it's okay. But this is cold. I don't know, maybe I should wait. Maybe I should have mixed it before Shabbos. I'll wait till after Shabbos. And within a few months, the store was closed on Shabbos. Right? So speaking a good word to somebody has the power to actually make that person better. Just like Hashem was able to create the world with a good word, with 10 utterances, we're able to create and build things with our words as well. And just like we can use a positive word and build something good, a negative word can also do damage. Right? There's a famous story of also with the Chavetz Chaim, who was traveling with another rabbi, and they had to travel to some rabbinical conference. And along the way, they stopped off at an inn, the Chavetz Chaim and this other rabbi. Obviously, the other rabbi's name is not brought down in the story, because the Chavetz Chaim didn't want to say over Lashon Hara when he said over the story. But he was traveling with another rabbi, and he stopped off at an inn. The innkeeper was so excited to have two respected rabbis come to her inn, and she personally, served them the food, served them a nice meal. And they ate together, they spoke words of Torah, and at the end of the meal, she came over to them and she asked, how was the soup? And Chavetz Chaim said, it was absolutely delicious. And the other rabbi says, it was pretty good, but missing a little salt. Okay, so she took the plates and she went back into the kitchen, and Chavetz Chaim looks at the other rabbi and his face turns red. He said, I can't believe what you just said. And the other rabbi said, what? I told you we needed a little more salt. And he says, all my life, I worked so hard not to hear a word of Lashon Hara. Right? Whenever I'm around people, I'm always so careful. I was around you, I thought, another rabbi, I shouldn't have to worry about it. And just right in front of me. Such open Lashon Hara. And he said, what are you talking about? It's not Lashon Hara. I was just, she asked me how the soup was, and I said it needed a little more salt. And the Chavetz Chaim said, you realize what your words just did? Do you realize how many sins you created with your words? And he says, what are you talking about? So the Chavetz Chaim says, let's try to figure out what's going to happen now, right? This woman, this innkeeper, right, didn't cook the food on her own. She has a cook in the kitchen who's working for her. She's going to go back. She just went back into the kitchen. The cook is probably a poor widow who really needs his job to support her family. And the owner's going to go back into the kitchen and she's going to tell the cook, you didn't put enough salt in the food. We had two honorable rabbis here and you weren't careful. You should have put more salt. Now, what's the cook going to say? She's not going to, she's being yelled at by her boss. She's going to say, no, I'm telling you, I put enough salt. I promise you, I tasted the food before, it had enough salt. And the innkeeper's going to yell at her, it's not true. How dare you call the rabbi outside a liar? And they're going to start arguing and then for all you know, she's going to fire her and she's going to lose her job. You know how many sins you committed with just a few words? First of all, you yourself spoke Lashon Hara. That's the first thing. Second of all, you caused me and the innkeeper to listen to your Lashon Hara. Third of all, you caused the innkeeper to repeat the Lashon Hara, right? When she went into the kitchen. And the fourth sin is that you caused the cook to lie. The fifth sin is you caused pain to a widow. And the sixth sin is that you cause an argument to break out. And perhaps if we don't stop it quick enough, you're going to cause a seventh sin and you're going to cause a woman to lose her job. And the other rabbi looks at the Chofetz Chaim and is like, come on, you're joking, Rabbi. Right? This is not, you're not being serious. You're exaggerating a little bit. And he says, let's go and look. And he both got up and they walked into the kitchen, and sure enough, there's an argument going on. The cook is crying and the innkeeper is yelling at her. And the rabbi rushes in. He's like, I'm so sorry. I think it had enough salt. It was my mistake, right? And they managed to stop the argument and to let the before it got even worse. And this is something that even people who are learning, even people who learn how important how careful we need to be with lashon hara. We might think it's just one word. It's just a simple thing. I said there's not enough salt. One word can cause so much damage. One little sentence can cause so much damage. We don't realize the power of our words. And the truth is that besides for the harm that we cause when people hear what we say, the words themselves have power. When a person says something, as we said before, when Hashem spoke, it's not that Hashem said something and somebody heard what Hashem said and they created the world. That's not what happened. The words themselves have power. And we don't realize the power of our words. In the city of Chukas, in Poland, in the year 1929, a big tzaddik named Reb Shmuel ben Reb Meir Frumkin passed away at the age of 83. He had spent the last 40 years of his life in complete silence. He had a reputation that was known for all the cities around Charkov. He spent all of his time learning and davening. And at night he wouldn't go to sleep. He would sleep he would put his head down on his stender. He wouldn't go to bed. He would put his head down on his stender and sleep there for a few hours every night. And he never said a word to anybody except for nu or right? And if you really needed to communicate with somebody, you would write down, but he wouldn't speak a word outside of the Torah and davening learning and davening. He wouldn't say a word to anybody. Now he actually understood 4 languages, and he was able to communicate in writing and listen to people in Yiddish, Hebrew, Polish, and Russian, but he never spoke a word. The Hasidim in Chukas admired him greatly, and actually at some time in his old age, they wanted to appoint him as their Rebbe. They wanted to make him the Rebbe of the Hasidim in Chukas. But he refused, and he kind of joked about it. He said, if you make me into a Rebbe, you're soon going to make me into an idol. Because it's written about idols that they have a mouth, but they don't speak. They have eyes, and they don't see. So he was getting old. His eyes didn't see anymore, and he didn't speak at all. So he said, I don't want to be your idol. That was his response. So what was his story? Why did he spend the last 40 years in silence? So his story was, he was known as the Shaskin of Chukas, the quiet one, or the silent one of Chukas. That's what he was known as. So he was born in the year 1846, and already in the city of Slavotin. From a young age, he was known as a genius. He was very well versed in Shas and Poskim. He received rabbinical ordination, but he didn't want to earn a living off Torah. He wanted, learn Torah only for the sake of Hashem. So he got a job as a supplier to the Russian military. He dealt with weapons and gunpowder, and he became very wealthy, and he was able to spend most of his time studying Torah and learning. He spent most of his day learning. However, a part of his job as a supplier to the Russian military was a bit of a political job. He had to meet many different generals and important military personnel. And he would host them he would come visit him in his house. He would host parties for them. And it was, these weren't the brightest and most refined people. Many of them were very, very unrefined and vulgar. And Shmuel's wife was not very happy about these wild parties that he would host for these military officers. And he would even bring out wine and drink wine with them. I guess he had some sort of way to make it halachically permissible. Maybe he had nevushal wine or whatever other methods he used to keep it kosher. And but his wife was not happy to see him get drunk with these lowly, vulgar Russian soldiers. And every time that he would ask her to prepare for one of these visits, she would give him a piece of her mind. She wasn't very excited about it. She said so he tried to explain to her how important it was for their parnasa, but she wouldn't really listen. And he, tried to ignore her. He continued doing it. One day, some of the top generals in the army were scheduled to come to his house, and he called his wife and he asked her to prepare some food, and he asked her to go down into the cellar and bring up some wine for the party. And she had had enough. She said, "What? You're going to waste another day partying and getting drunk? When I married you, I thought you were going to sit and learn. I knew you're a big Talmud Chacham, and now you're busy drinking with these low, vulgar people? No, I don't want to have anything to do with it," she said. And Shmuel was not in the mood for complaints, and he said, "You don't want to do it? Fine. I'll prepare the food. You don't want to be involved. You don't need to be involved. I'll prepare the food. I'll get the wine." And she says, "No, it doesn't have to do with preparing food and getting the wine. I don't want you to do it, right? I don't want you to be involved in this. You're my husband. I don't want you to spend your time this way." And he became very frustrated, very upset. And he said, "Get off my case. Just get out of here. I wish." And then the words came out of his mouth without thinking. He says, "I wish you would just blow up," he said. She was shocked by what he had just said. And he himself was also surprised. Obviously, he hadn't planned to say this. They both became quiet. She left the room. And he knew that he should apologize, but he was kind of maybe in shock or embarrassed. And he kept quiet. And she went to do what he told her to do, to prepare. She prepared some food, and then she went down into the cellar to get the wine. Now, the cellar was very dark, and she took a candle with her. But she was so disturbed by what her husband had just said that she went to the wrong side of the cellar. Instead of going to the wine area of the cellar, she went to the area where the big barrels of gunpowder were stored, and the resulting explosion was a disaster. His wife and 2 of his children were killed. He himself barely survived. And in addition to the loss of his family, you can imagine the guilt that he felt after what happened. And he was broken, and he went to his Rebbe, David Moshe Friedman of Chartkov. He was the son of the Ruzhiner Rebbe. And I asked the Rebbe, how can I do tshuva for such a thing? And the Rebbe told him, the only tshuva for your tongue is that it never speak another word. And that's what he did. He spent the last 40 years of his life, learning and davening, but not saying another word to another person. And he was a lesson. I mean, he didn't tell the story over, but the story was always told over. He was an example to everybody about the power that a word can have, right? And the truth is, even in most cases where our words that we say in anger don't come out into the real world, but on a spiritual level, every word we say has an effect, right? There's the famous story in Mezhibush. The Baal Shem Tov once walks into the shul, and there's a big fight going on in shul. 2 people are fighting. I don't know what they're fighting over. Maybe over seats, maybe over some cholent. I don't know what the fight was over. It's over some l'chaim. And one of them turns to the other one and says, "I'm going to rip you apart like a fish," he says to him. And at that moment, the Baal Shem Tov walks in, and everybody's quiet. Of course, they're both embarrassed, and the Baal Shem Tov calls the 2 people who are involved in the fight, and he calls over all of his students, and he asks them all to stand around in a circle. And he asks them to close their eyes. They closed their eyes, and then the Baal Shem Tov joined the circle, and he asked everybody to put their hands on each other's shoulders. And at that moment, all the people in the circle suddenly started to yell. They were able to see how this person was physically taking his friend and ripping him apart. And they immediately, removed their hands, and they weren't able to see it anymore. And the Baal Shem Tov said, on every word that comes out of your mouth on some spiritual level is actually happening. And this is really the message that Hashem was trying to teach the Jewish people in this week's Torah portion. The Rambam writes that one of the main reasons why we have so much fights and so many arguments is because people don't understand the power and the importance of every word we say. We think we could say, when we speak badly about another person, we say it's just words. I'm not touching him. I'm not harming him. I'm just speaking about him. And we don't realize that these simple words that we say about another person, a negative word that we say, is what starts all the fights and the arguments. And that's why at this point, right after Parshas Koirach, where we learned about the terrible arguments that took place amongst the Jewish people, and now, this is many years later, obviously it's a Parsha afterwards, but it's many years later, but the Yidden are about to enter Eretz Yisrael, and Hashem knows that ultimately what's going to get us removed from Eretz Yisrael is fighting and arguments amongst the Jewish people. Hashem wanted to show them how careful you have to be with every word. And therefore he says to Moshe, until now, you've done so many miracles for the Jewish people with your stick. I want you to show the Jewish people that you can do a miracle with saying one word. You can provide water. You can say one word and millions of people will have water to drink. Millions of thirsty people in the desert will have water to drink. I want this to be a lesson. I want them to understand the power that a single word has. And that's why Hashem was so upset when Moshe ended up hitting the rock. Because this lesson wasn't taught. But it's a lesson that we have to realize. It's a lesson that we all have to realize. The power of every single word that we say. Right? And as we said, there are 3 points over here. First of all, when we say a word to somebody, it actually affects that person. When the person hears what we say, as we said, whether it's good or bad, it affects the person. Second of all, even a person doesn't hear what we say. A word that we say actually has power. It can sometimes manifest itself in the physical world, as the story we said earlier, or it has some effect on a spiritual level. And just to conclude the final story, the story happened almost exactly a year ago, a little less. It happened on Parshas Balak, Shabbos Parshas Balak last year. I was in Shul Shabbos by Mincha. I'm not going to say any names, even though it's not really Lashon Hara. It's a story that was publicized. So I was in Shul Shabbos by Mincha, and they were reading the Torah. Mincha of Parshas Balak, they started reading the Parsha of Pinchas, right? And they open up the Torah, they call up the Kohen, and the rabbi opens up the Torah, and he looks inside, and he points to one of the letters, and he's the vav the letter's broken. And everybody's like shocked, everybody gathers around to look at the thing, and indeed it was a broken letter over there. And some people are getting nervous, they need to take out a new Sefer Torah. And then the rabbi smiles and he says, it's supposed to be broken. This is the only letter in the Sefer Torah that's supposed to be broken. Right? Now, obviously the rabbi had a lesson he was trying to teach of the reason behind the broken vav, which we're not going to discuss now. There's a lesson that you learn from it. But the way he brought out the lesson was by, I guess, tricking everybody or scaring everybody for a second to think that there was a problem with the Torah. Okay, everybody calmed down. They read the Aliyah. They called up a Levi. And they finished the second Aliyah, the Kohen went down, and they called up the Yisrael for the third Aliyah.
What weren't they doing Pinchas?
What?
They were doing Pinchas.
They were doing the first section of Parshas Pinchas. No, Mincha, Parshas Balak, you start reading the next Parsha. The Mincha of Shabbos, you read the next Parsha. So they got to the third Aliyah, and the rabbi's in the middle of reading the third Aliyah, and suddenly he stops. And he's like looking in the Torah, and everyone's like, what's going on? And he says, the vav is broken. And they're like, yeah, you already played that trick on us once, right? You fooled me once. Right? Shame on you. Fool me twice. It's not going to work this time, right? And the rabbi's like, no, really. It's a broken vav. And they looked, and there was a different vav. This is the vav of Vayihi Acharei Magefa. And the vav was written very short. There was somewhere between a vav and a yud. And they called up one of the children in Shul, a 7-year-old boy who was in Shul, and the boy read it as a yud, and they had to take the Torah, roll it, wrap it up, and put it away in Aron HaKodesh, right? And afterwards, of course, we were talking about it. He was trying to teach a lesson about the broken vav, the vav that was supposed to be broken. But even just saying words, there's a broken letter in the Torah. 5 minutes later, there was a broken vav in the Torah, right? It's a tremendous lesson in the power that every word that we say has. And we have to realize this. We have to realize the power that we have with a negative word, and on the other hand, the power we have with a positive word. a good word we say about somebody has the power to help that person and help that person improve their lives. And just like Hashem was able to create the entire world with 10 utterances, we can create and build up and fix the entire world with some good words that we say about another person. Chaim, Chaim.